Jacob.
And I'm Maddie.
And we're the Indigenous Oral History and Rock Art Hunters.
Today we're on Vancouver Island in the Pacific Northwest, where there's a long established practice of both oral tradition and rock art among Indigenous peoples. British Columbia is a hotspot for rock art, so that's why we've traveled here to delve into how archaeologists can use these oral traditions to produce a more robust standing of this region's deep history.
This deep history of Indigenous peoples can be seen on the landscape and heard through their stories. Rock art specifically persists as a highly visible mark of the diverse people, their histories, and their culture.
Rock art has long been studied by archaeologists as a universal phenomenon. And when it comes to this kind of research, archaeologist Polly Shafsma says the goal of the archaeologist is to offer some kind of hypothesis about what the rock art tells us about the people who created it.
Now, archaeologists have had varying levels of success while doing this, but one thing that helps them here in the Northwest is the use of Indigenous oral histories. These traditions have often been overlooked as myths or legends that lack scientific objectivity. But in 1997, the Supreme Court of Canada recognized these oral narratives as valid historical records.
So over the last 2 decades, Northwest Coast archaeologists have been trying to combine oral narratives and histories with their archaeological research.
We're here today to explore the importance of oral traditions when it comes to the archaeological study of rock art.
So we set off to answer this question. We hit the books, pored over articles, and questioned the nature of our very existence.
Oral history.
I've got it. So, we often use the terms oral traditions, oral narratives, and oral histories interchangeably. But I've discovered there's actually a difference between these terms. So, Alicia Gavreau, a grad student here at UVic's anthropology department, describes these differences for us. So, oral traditions are the actual social processes of transmitting important information orally through what we call oral narratives. Oral narratives can be thought of the stories Indigenous peoples have and can provide historical accounts of events of and on the landscape, and many of these stories go back deep in time. These narratives hold ecological, social, medicinal, political, and spiritual knowledge that are passed on from generation to generation. Our last term, oral histories, refer to the first-hand experiences and eyewitnesses accounts of people documented during, say, an interview.
Rock art. Hey Jacob, listen to this. So rock art is a universal phenomena, and Shafsma, she's an archaeologist in the US. She talks about how rock art can be seen as a visual dialogue that takes many forms. Within BC, though, I think Arnett, she talks about how rock art in BC represents a wide range of meanings, from the abstract and philosophical to the contingent and situational.
Critiques. So, Maddie, many people have just dismissed oral traditions as unscientific myths and legends with no use to archaeologists.
I'd have to say that's not the case, at least in my research. I found that archaeology often proves these oral narratives true, as well as these oral narratives can help to give archaeologists an idea of where they should be looking for their studying.
But isn't using oral traditions just cherry picking little bits of information here and there?
I mean, it's arguable that written documents can also be cherry-picked. And one can say that oral history is biased, but isn't written history just the same?
Okay. Isn't using oral traditions for archaeology just exploiting that data for scientific purposes?
Well, many Indigenous groups on the Northwest Coast have an interest in archaeological research.
I guess it does tend to prove them right.
Yeah, and Aurora Scala, a local archaeologist and Indigenous knowledge researcher, highlights the ethical imperative of consulting with the descendant community when studying rock art. So while there is a potential for exploiting data, I think that archaeologists are aware that they have an obligation to the people in the land.
Okay.
So moving forward, it's something to keep in mind, definitely. After many an hour of researching Indigenous oral traditions, rock art, and their relationship, we soon realized we weren't getting anywhere and still had many unanswered questions. And after many frustrating late nights, it finally occurred to us, why not actually go talk to someone who has real connections to these topics? We've come to the University of Victoria, to the First Peoples House, to come talk to our friend Amory.
So let's head into the ceremonial hall and
See what happens. We acknowledge with respect to the Lekwungen-speaking peoples on whose traditional territory the university stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with this land continue to this day. We're here today in the ceremonial hall talking to our friend Amory. Amory, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from.
Okay, yeah, I am a third-year student at the University of Victoria. I am studying philosophy. I am from Bella Bella, BC, which is the Heiltsuk Nation. It's just off the coast of British Columbia on a little island near the south tip of Haida, if you know where that is.
Yeah, cool. And what can you tell us about Indigenous rock art and your personal relationship with it?
Yeah, so my experience with Indigenous rock art is there's a little channel in Bella Bella called Troop, which me and my dad would go to when we wanted to do crab fishing, and we have a spot that we usually go to. And by that area, there's a small channel, and along the left side of the channel, there's a rock face, and there's a painting in red of a copper symbol, which is a significant symbol in our culture of wealth and of family and of sharing. So that's my first-hand experience of that, of a rock face painting.
That sounds beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you. So what do you know about oral history and its connection to where you're from?
Yeah, so we can use that very painting as an example. There isn't any, or there wasn't any written documentation of this painting being there. The only way I learned about it is being shown it, and we would never look at any maps or any books or anything to really learn about where it is. My dad would take me out on the boat, and he'd be, there it is, and remember this spot, this is Troop, this is where we come, this is where we fish. So that's my connection with the oral history of it. It wasn't until the settlers came over and just wanted to document everything that they actually started forming a written language. Before that, it was just all in oral history.
Perfect, thank you.
Would you be able to tell us a story that is an oral history story?
Yeah, sure. So I only know bits and pieces because the stories are long and involve a lot of different things. So basically, from what I can remember, this is a story of creation. So there was a mother that had 4 sons, and they ended up getting in a dispute, and one of the sons ran away into the woods for, I believe originally it was 4 years. The number 4 is the significant thing here because there was 4 brothers. It's 4 years that he went out, and then he came back one day 4 years later, and the brothers greeted him like nothing had happened. Like they just wanted him back in the family. And to celebrate him coming back, they decided to have a potlatch. And that's the origin of where the potlatch came from. So, but when they met up with their brother, they realized he wasn't quite the same. He had turned into a wild man, which in our culture is called a hamatsa or a tanis. It's kind of a, you can use either, interchangeable. And the potlatch was to bring him back into civilization, to turn him back into a person. And there's also in our potlatch, there's a hamatsa ceremony, which we still do today, where someone will go out into the woods. It's not 4 years anymore. It's 4 days. Eventually I will have to do this because my dad's a hamatsa and it gets passed down from generation to generation. And you go out for 4 days, and then you come back and there's a potlatch held for you to bring you back into civilization. There's much more to that story, but that's all I can remember from what I was told when I was a kid. Yeah.
And that's kind of neat to know the origin of what you're going to have to go through.
Yeah, of course.
I think it's important to know where it comes from. And will your son have to do it one day as well?
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
So what do you think archaeologists can gain from working with communities like yours?
Yeah, so there was a finding earlier this year, actually. I'm sure you might have seen it over Facebook. There was a village site that was found to be like 14,000 years old, which is a lot older than what they had believed to be for people living there around the times. So for archaeologists working in the area, with communities like mine, I feel like you could discover a lot more about Canada with the help, because my communities know where certain village sites were. Like, that's another thing my dad would show me when we were out on the boat. He'd show me the areas where the old village sites were. Right. You could tell there's a slightly different trees that grow there, and it's very interesting. So yeah, I think it would open up a huge field for archaeology and just discovering the history of Canada.
Right.
And where people lived and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciated talking to you, and it was lovely hearing all your stories.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy you guys have an interest in such a thing, so I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and it's been great.
Yeah,
Yeah, and hopefully we will talk to you in the future about these types of topics as well.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks.